Hi guys, and welcome to the Jinn and Tonic show. We help Muslims and non-Muslims to handle Islam in the 21st century. My name is Mustafa and this is my co-host in the nick of time. If you wish to talk about Islam, the ideology, you have come to the right place. We cover current Islamic news, Islamic scripture, some crazy comments, and a weekly topic about Islam to examine, critique, and analyze. If this is not enough Islam for you, please drop by our Discord to discuss any further questions about Islam. We condemn any form of discrimination, violence, misogyny, slavery. However, we do embrace free speech and criticism if it's factual and correct. Thank you for stopping by and enjoy the Gin and Tonic show.
Hello. Welcome everyone to the Gin and Tonic show, all three of us. Today's the 11-year anniversary. We actually missed the 10-year anniversary last year. I think Moose and I just got the show like a month after it. But yeah, today's a really special episode. I'm here with Stops, the godfather of this show, Rob Speakers, and Drastic Measures.
Hey.
Good evening. Welcome. It's great to see some of our fellow presenters and that you guys are doing so well. So pleasure to be here.
So I heard that you tried to get Atheismo. I tried to contact, I told Rationalizer, I said to him, listen, if you have time, pop in. Maybe he is, I don't know.
I can tell you about Atheismo. I have actually spoken to him. He was supposed to come onto my channel earlier today to do an interview just about his time on the show. Unfortunately, because I've been ill, I've cancelled that. But we are going to be doing it tomorrow. So anyone who's interested in kind of him in the live stream, myself, to his time running, then tune into my channel tomorrow, and it's 3 p.m. UK time. And you can have a catch up then. But unfortunately, he was not too keen about actually coming on the show itself because there's he felt like it might be seen as kind of a comeback or something, and he says he's not interested in getting into religious debates again. So that's just the update of atheism.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, if you can put your channel in the live chat there, Drastic Measures, I'll pin it for everyone to go and subscribe.
Yeah, sure.
And how are you doing, by the way? I hope you're well.
I'm still not 100%, as I say. I was coughing a lot earlier this afternoon, which is why I didn't think it'd be too good a listening experience and did go ahead with the live stream. But feeling a bit better today, now. But I may mute myself from time to time, and that'll be me having a coughing fit probably. So.
But what is it? Is that COVID?
I don't think so. It's been. I think it's just quite a severe cold, but it's not been for the last week or so. So, I'm only just kind of getting back to my former self.
It's early, isn't it? Don't you normally get this like in November, December?
I think it's because I haven't had a cold since COVID started, and I think it's I don't know. It's like my immune system is weak or something because not being exposed to the typical viruses you would be when you're kind of more out. So Anyway, probably shouldn't keep talking about my.
Yes, you're welcome to the show. Coughing has something to do with a lot of coffee, of course. Yes, if you don't put enough milk in there, then you cough a lot after coffee.
Anyway, it's really great to have both you and Rob on the show again because it's been a long time. So
it is. It's like
yes.
You know when you used to. I mean, I remember when I had a girlfriend and then we broke up and then for some reason you got back together for a week or something, and it felt like at home. And this is what it feels like. Seeing these logos and all that and hearing the voices. It's like the good old. I hate those good old days, but it.
And how about you,
Rob?
Yeah,
it's great to be back. Yeah, it's great to be back. I'm getting on with work and other stuff, but I do hang out most days actually on Clubhouse. So that's where my local haunt is, and It's been fascinating. It's been educational. I'm now of the view that I have a knockdown argument against theism in general. I've always sort of held to the idea with Islam that the inheritance error is a knockdown error. But I've got now a more general argument that I could present to any theist if they take the view that God is maximally powerful, all-knowing, omnibenevolent, perfectly rational. If they take those as minimal qualities, then I've got, I think, now a pretty strong argument that I take the view that God cannot exist. It's not just that I lack a belief or any. I think that's a weak position to hold personally, and it's not just that I think God probably doesn't exist. As long as you define God that way, I think God is in fact impossible. So I take a much stronger view now, and it's not just my view. I have an argument from somebody has a master's in philosophy, and I've tested this, I've stress tested it a reasonably decent amount to most theists. I mean, I haven't done it against a philosopher in any way, but I have presented it against people that are philosophically literate, and I've not heard a good response against it. So if you ever want to hear about that, I could go through that at some point with you, and I think that is a very strong argument now.
Oh yeah,
we'd love to hear it as well.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear it.
Fascinating.
Yeah, you let me know at some point when, let's get through any other things that you have, and then if you've got it in your mind, and I'll run through it, and I'll give you, it has 5 premises, it has 6 conclusions. I typically don't go through each conclusion. I just do a summary of that for people, because if a theist doesn't object to one of the 5 premises, then all the conclusions are just inferences. In other words, they follow logically. You can't object to a conclusion unless you object to one of the premises. So I can present that to you later on. Just remind me and I'll go through that if you like.
Do you have anything planned? Where are the candles? When do we blow? When do we sing? What, where, when, how?
Oh yeah, no, I had a special show planned. Culture Jenny kind of was like, no, thank you. It was probably for the best anyways. It would have shut down the channel.
Where's Mustafa?
If I tell you, it'll be harmful for him. So I'd rather keep that private, considering his location.
Oh dear.
Oh yeah.
Well,
okay. Next innocuous question.
So yeah, I actually had one thing that I think it's a very relevant topic that we have. So I'm gonna show an image. Just want to get your opinion on that before we move on to some questions that Drastic Metrics have, almost like a crazy comment style.
So it's a charade and not shahada.
Yeah. It's this photo.
Somebody's buzzing here. I can't quite see it on my screen. It's quite small. Let me see if I can see it.
Perfect. This is so good. And people always ask me, well, how do you see this? I say, well, what is different this time? Because I've seen 3 of these, sort of uprisings or demonstrations and all sorts of things. But this time it's specific. And this time everybody is behind it. And that is what is the most important thing, is it's specific about something that everybody can get behind. That is the good thing about this.
I've been out of the loop a little bit. So as my understanding is this lady lost her life. So maybe you could, just shows how little I've been following that side of the news. Maybe everybody knows about it, but what's the 20-second summary of it?
So essentially, this 20-year-old or 22-year-old girl who's the age of my younger sister went out without a hijab for a protest, and the morality police beat her to death.
Literally in the street, or did they arrest her and then?
No,
arrested her
beat her up
on the street, and this is what caused the protests in Iran. I believe it's Iraq, right? That we see now. I get confused by those two all the time.
Is it Iran or Iraq?
Iran,
yeah.
My
okay.
bad, yeah. I always get them confused.
She's a Kurd. So she comes from, it's a different area. It's between Iran and Turkey. So it's in the northwest of Iran.
Iraq or Iran?
Iran, in the northeast of Iran, on the border between Turkey and Iran. And she was in Tehran visiting, and somebody objected because she was walking with the, they called it, I don't know if it was, I think it was a chador as well, that it was a little bit too revealing, because this is the latest fashion, showing a little bit of protest where the women uncover half the head. and they show the neck. And all of a sudden, because you can see the neck and half the hair, the morality police is now cracking down on this because this is simply too daring. Because if men see the neck and the hair, then this is too much. So they confronted her. She said, "Fuck you." And sorry, she said, "Leave me alone." And then they proceeded to beat her up, and she hemorrhaged and later broke down and died.
Yeah, shocking. I mean, our ancestors, sorry, not our ancestors, the generations ahead, whatever the word is, escapes me now. I hope they look back as we do on slavery and stuff, and look back at incidents like this. These people, they were just barely above animal levels from a cave. But who knows how long that'll take.
Yeah, there's another incident because there was a journalist who is, I think she went to the UK and she was being interviewed now in the States. And she said she was visiting family after they left Iran. And she was visiting friends of hers. And then her uncle took her there and she was a kid. Okay, she was like 12 years old. And they were stopped in the street and somebody demanded to see their marriage certificate because she, as a little girl, was walking with an older man and they wanted to see her marriage certificate.
Yeah. What do you say about that, Ron?
Yeah. No further comment required.
And Jesus Christ, at 22, like they have, considering that they just got out of college at that time, probably 21, 22 is when you graduate, so she probably had an entire career. She's just starting her career at that point, had an entire career ahead of her.
Yeah.
Probably could have achieved something. And it's just sad to see at that age that some idiots decided it was time to end that career.
Well, this is why I'm hoping that all these demonstrations are, they're not only more substantial, but they are consequential. In other words, so that you actually see some kind of result, some kind of action after and behind this. Because the last 2 times or 3 times, they just sort of fizzled out. And I remember that everybody here on YouTube colored their avatars in green in support of the revolution in Iran. And then it just disappeared. And this is why I'm hoping this time, because it is specific, because now the guys and the women, everybody is behind this. So this is a general thing. I'm hoping that this time it's going to be more substantial. Hoping. I mean, but the question that we always need to ask ourselves is what comes afterwards? This was the big thing that I had in South Africa. Yes, we need to replace apartheid, but with what? And nobody asked that question. And this is a question that we also need to ask ourselves. What is it that we want in Iran? What is going to change if this society disappears? Because they are quite clear. They want the Islamic State to disappear. They don't want a God in the constitution. But then what are you going to have? Is a society based on Islam ready for a democracy? I don't know.
Well, I suppose you have it in Turkey to an extent, don't you? I mean, I know Erdogan has become kind of more authoritarian as the years have gone on, but Turkey seems to function okay. But there's this...
Well, they did. They were.
Well, this is the problem, though, isn't it, as you say, because there seems to be this ever-present potential of the hardline Islam coming back. I mean,
correct. Yeah.
Since the days of Ataturk, I mean, Turkey has always been balanced between this kind of a drive towards secularism from maybe half the population and a drive for more conservative Islam on the other side. And it's just a war that never seems to end. So I'm not optimistic for Iran. As you say, even if they do replace it, I could see it's just as likely to get some kind of authoritarian strongman like Saddam Hussein comes out of it rather than a democracy. So, yeah.
Yeah, but that was better for the people. You see, I was there under the Shah. Okay, so I remember the times when we were petrified if we even said the name Savak, the secret police, because I mean, he was authoritarian. I mean, of course, a lot of people were sent to jail if they were in any way critical of the Shah. So it was absolutely a despotic tyrant, absolutely. But for the people in general, it was better. And this is another question: do you bring back somebody? Do you bring back a dictator, or is it? How do you please everybody? Because what you would have to do is actually split up the whole country into different groups. But then that doesn't work anymore because they don't have the economic clout that they have together. So I don't know. Do I have a
Stops. I have a
solution?
question. I have a question for you on par with that. How much would you say it being a religious issue as opposed to a class issue? Because oppression under an authoritarian regime on the base would have really similar elements, no matter what the surface level is, right? So, how much would you say we should learn from other class-based issues or other authoritarian regimes here in terms of replacement?
I have no idea. Really, I don't know. Because there is no such thing as a perfect system. There is no such thing as a goal where I would say it is going to please everybody. There is no such thing.
Well, a friend of mine, she lived in Iran when the Shah was around as well, and she said a pretty similar thing to you, Stop. That yes, it was obviously authoritarian, it was oppressive, but she was living there as a single woman from the West, and she still spoke far more favourably for that regime than what followed it after the revolution. I mean, particularly
Exactly.
for women, it's become a lot worse. So yeah, what do you do? I don't know. It's not a great situation, but yeah, I'm really skeptical that you'd suddenly get a democratic system out of it.
Yeah, well, is democracy great? I don't know. Look at what it did in the UK. Ask Rob what happened. I mean, why is it that the UK suddenly decided to leave the European Union? Has it been beneficial for everybody? I doubt it.
That's a complex question, and we'll probably
and
take
that's
up the whole show to discuss
but
it.
Yeah,
I
but now
want
but if you introduce that and you then add into the mix the religious aspect, where you quite rightly said there is this potential all the time, then what are you going to have?
Yeah, I think Culture Jenny. I think Culture Jenny wanted to add something as well, right?
yeah, regarding the Shah and before the Islamic Revolution. I mean, the problem is that just because the Islamic, current Islamic establishment, quote unquote, falls, does not mean that what replaces is going to be better. And the Shah
Exactly.
wasn't, and the Shah was actually by certain metrics worse than what it did get replaced by in certain metrics. I
Yeah,
think there
yeah, I
was
agree.
someone that argued that death counts and executions were actually more under the Shah.
Okay, this I don't know. I just know that there were certain aspects that were worse, but in general, from what I saw from my perspective, I felt that people had more freedoms and could do more things than they can do at the moment.
And I think the standard of living was generally higher as
Much
well.
higher,
In terms
yeah.
of economically, I think things were a lot more stable. But it's a complex question.
I agree. It's complex, but the thing is, I'm just saying that I'm positive to these demonstrations, and I would even be positive to a revolution, but I would be, mix it somewhat with, let's just say that some things that could hamper my optimism, and just say I'm just a bit cautious about how this could develop.
Yeah, exactly. Replace it, but with what?
Yeah.
Is there such a thing, Rob? What would you say? Is there such a thing as a Islamic democracy?
Yeah, I'm not aware of one. I think that's sort of a contradiction, really.
Isn't it just? Yeah.
Because democracy is a kuffar concept created by the pagans known as the Greeks.
Well, the thing is, I'm very active at the moment on the German side, okay? Because now I'm active in a atheism TV channel, which is not specifically, sort of directed at Islam, but I've just come from a discussion with Muslims on Discord, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to, get this concept through that Rob and I tried to do for many years, and that is build bridges and not walls. And this is why we are seriously going in this direction, where we are now talking to reasonable Muslims who are not, this Salafi or Wahhabi sort of flavor, or whatever you want to call it, or breed, and trying to show that there is a way that you can be a Muslim and still accept worldly laws and rules and regulations and a society, and still sort of feel a sort of a Muslim. But it's very difficult. It's very different. And this is why both of these guys have a bit of a Sufi background, which makes it a lot easier, I think.
Are Sufis really any more reasonable in that sense, though? I mean, I know the reputation is that Sufis kind of have a more spiritual kind of outlook, but I wasn't really sure if that relationship was justified, or is it's just one of these myths that's come out, because
it's just
they're
that
following
kind
the
of.
same, well, they're following the same religion, aren't they? And I don't know sort of how are they interpreting the Quran particularly differently to most Orthodox Muslims, or?
Well, what they say is that we are more in the direction of live and let live. We are more in the spirit of you believe what you want, we believe it, but we don't make any demands towards your way of life. We will accommodate, or we will integrate into what there is for us today, and we will make the best of it. And this is something that I find totally acceptable.
Oh yeah, that's makes it much easier to have a pluralistic society if
Exactly. And this is what I call reasonable, and this is what I call having a conversation where you can build bridges, which is try that with Tsotsis from my era. Forget it.
Yeah, or hijab, or Ali Daba, or
Yeah, those guys, exactly.
Sorry, just to divert slightly, did you see all the craziness with them two going to Leicester and stirring up
I
trouble?
saw a couple of videos, yeah.
Hijab ended up on the Channel 4 News even over the whole thing, which is, you know, pretty large news network in the UK. And he was trying to do his kind of scholarly, you know, puts across himself as some great scholar of Islam, but you can always just see the underlying thug hanging underneath that. And yeah, some of the videos that came out from it was quite funny. Yeah, sorry, just a little bit of a diversion there, but this is a problem though, because I look at the likes of Ali Dar and Mohammed Hijab, and I know when you and Rob were doing the show for years, you were documenting a lot of what they were doing, and they still have such a stranglehold on.
But are they representative?
Well, I mean, I would say there was one good thing that came out of that whole Leicester debacle, was the fact that a lot of the Muslims did react quite badly to them when they went there, and they said that they were just they recognised they were just clout chasing, as they call it, just trying to get some attention for their channels and stuff. So I was quite. It was pleasing to see that a lot of the local Muslims saw them for what they were, just being there to manipulate the situation for their own ends. So that was positive. But at the same time, I mean, between the two of them, they've got nearly 1.5 million subscribers, and that's just two of these Darba guys. There's plenty of others.
Yeah, but that's not really serious. I think there's a lot of brotherhood coming through there. I need to subscribe to push the numbers, but I don't think that the people are actually watching it. And Smile is making a good point. Every minority sect of Islam vocalizes peaceful spiritual aspects until they have a chance of power. And this is a very good point. And you never know if the one that you are talking to is the exception to the rule or is the rule. You don't know that. And culture, Ginny, exactly. So if you have this flavor of Sufism that is violent and that is, I suppose, stuck in the 10th century or something, yeah, I mean that was pretty brutal, and they were very harsh in that. But these guys are not that way at all. So I think that brand of Sufism, I think, doesn't exist anymore. I hope so, anyway.
Yeah. Before we divert too much, about the anti-hijab protest, I actually have a video. So, do you guys want to continue with the new discussion we're having, or do you guys want to react to that video as well?
No, go with the video. Come on.
Yeah, video sounds good.
All right. So let me just pull up the video file here.
Ted Nugent, for me, is a legend. I mean, he pushed so much in Ireland.
All right, I'm gonna have to Use my...
Beyond Masa.
All right, so this channel that I pulled the video up from is called Vion in India. So I think it's more of a right-wing platform, but it does have 6.94 million subscribers on YouTube. Talks a lot about the issues in India. And they usually do like 8 to 10 minute news segments on various topics. I don't know if you guys know this channel or not.
Nope.
No.
No, I don't know it either. No.
All right, so let's just go through these. Generally, if you guys want to react to like certain news things, I highly recommend these guys because they do give a lot of juicy content. But yeah, we can go through the video and just see your opinions. Let me know when you want to pause it.
Now, our top focus on Beyond. Mahsa Amini has become a household name across the world. The Iranian woman became the face of dissent against a crackdown on women's rights. At a time when all eyes are on Tehran, one would expect and think that the morality police will be in line. But that's not the case. 16-year-old Nika Shakarami has died just hours after attending a protest. According to her mother, she was last seen standing on a dump.
Oh, I thought it couldn't get lower with the 22-year-old. Now we're at 16.
Yeah,
Is
it's
this a different
appalling.
person?
I think there
Yeah.
were two, though. Weren't there two girls that died now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and this was done on October 11th as well. So this was when it was published. All right, let's continue playing it.
And burning her headscarf in the capital. Hundreds others were standing along with her, chanting slogans. That was 20th of September. She soon left the protest sites after being chased by the police. This latest video has put police's version under the lens. Just last week, the state TV showed a blurry footage of a girl walking down an alley and entering a building. Officials claimed that the girl was Nika and that she was thrown from the under-construction building. Her body was found in a morgue 10 days later by her family after she went missing. Since the start, the victim's mother has denied all of these allegations and blamed the authorities for killing Shakarami. The family even denied that the video released by the police is not of their daughter. The mother...
It's strange that a 7-Eleven security cam has more pixels than whatever the police are using to kill girls with. Yeah, no, in that video it was, and if that's what they're using as an excuse or whatever it is, that small video, like, it's inexcusable. It's like that Otto Warmbier situation where North Korea killed an American teenager. Like, it's really just shows the level of
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
authoritarianism.
You can't really see, can you?
Yeah. Like, I've seen convenience store security cams that do a better job at picking up stuff. Oh, and welcome Pio after a long time.
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen.
Hey, Pierre.
Yeah, it's just nostalgia. I just wanted to be in it.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah.
Just checking on what the Gin and Tonic show is doing. What do you guys do? Do you watch videos? Do you do criticism? Because I haven't been here for a couple of times. What kind of an approach are you driving, by the way, if you're looking at this video now? Do you do a lot of this still?
So yeah, we still do. So last week I actually had technical difficulties, so I went camping for the weekend. And what I did was I recorded a 2-hour video on evolution. And I put it on as a premiere to set as a live stream premiere, the pre-recorded video, but it never actually released or uploaded or whatever it's supposed to do. And the thing is, I couldn't really tell because I was in the middle of the forest. The week before, Culture Ginny and I did an entire 2-hour presentation on Egypt. I did on like the dynastic Egypt, pre-dynastic, and the Ptolemaic dynasty, and he did it on the Islamic Egypt. And that turned out to be around 2 hours. And before that, we've been doing a lot of topics, video reviews and such.
Because I remember Rob and I used to do a lot of these video reviews, and this was always number one, good fun. The number two, people appreciated it.
Yeah. I really like doing the video reviews and such, but then there's like certain times where I do like doing the research beforehand, like the evolution one and the Egypt one, where
Right.
I did go into a lot of depth. For the Egypt one, if you actually look at my original PowerPoint, I had around 500 slides on it, so I had to cut it down to 40. So yeah, it was not fun.
Well, 500, that would be a marathon in 3 days or something.
Yeah, it's definitely why, just to show mercy to the audience, and also me being a tightwad and not wanting to book the studio for another hour, I had to cut it short. Yeah. All right, so let's play this and continue.
Sorry, I was just very curious about this.
Yeah, no worries, yeah.
The has also alleged that 2 of her family members were forced into making false statements. Now, Nika is not the only young female protester to have been killed during the unrest. Iranian Society for Protecting the Rights of Child reported that a total of 28 children have been killed since the protests erupted.
28.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, it's... And Muhammad, I tried to search up a specific Muhammad hijab video about this. Not one video has been made about this protest.
Are you surprised?
Yeah, I was about to say, it's not exactly a shock, is it, that he's not covered this?
Oh no, I thought he was going to make a video about how this is like Christianity. How Christianity had the Crusades and such.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can imagine where his sympathies lie over this whole thing. You know, if these women would just, follow the proper Islamic rules, then it wouldn't happen. Although he'd probably say it a little bit more carefully than that, but
yeah.
He would say, if she didn't provoke it, it would not happen to her, right?
No, it's her own fault. You're right, yeah.
Yeah, that's the
She
one
wouldn't
thing
leave it alone.
Yeah, that's the one thing he needs to understand. If I'm a thief, even if the guy opens up his wallet, shows me all the money inside of that wallet, and he's like, yo, steal it, it's still my fault for stealing the money. I'm still the one that gets punishment, no matter how much he instigates, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but
obviously,
Nick, now you're being rational. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't be rational. You can't be you can't be reasonable and logical. No, you can't.
no,
yeah.
Sorry. Yes.
No worries. It just gets to me, like the fact that we did this entire video on polygamy. I stopped. You were there as well, right? And any form of like logic gets this guy like. The only way the woman could have defended herself was to start speaking logic and fact, and he would have like hid in his corner.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's continue with this guy.
The latest incident has revived the growing anger against Iranian authorities. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's administration has been accused of imposing restrictions on women. From public movement to dress code, there are laws regulating every aspect of a woman's life. Current protests are being seen as hopeful start for a change. Demonstrations are extremely uncommon in the country, let alone one led by women.
Now, I've driven a motorbike in India, so seeing a tire lit on fire on the middle of the road doesn't actually shock me. So is there something wrong with me, or is that like normal in that region?
No comment.
All right.
Yes, there's something wrong with you. How can you not?
Oh no, there's like cows, there's tires lit on fire and such all over the middle of the road. Did you just like drive around them when you're driving over there?
I've never seen a burning tire in the middle of the road in Tehran.
Then yeah, I didn't know how it is in Tehran. I just know Hyderabad, and it's like All right. So I didn't know what to expect.
Burning tires reduced the effects of tear gas. You are such a dodo.
John Opet is one of the best. We should just say hi.
You shouldn't do this. I'm laughing. I'm supposed to be serious. I'm supposed to be in tears. And it's tears of laughter and not tears of contempt.
I don't know. 11 years anniversary of the show, and look what we've declined to now. This is terrible.
I apologize for turning your beloved show into a comedy show.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Dots. If I tell you my original idea, you might come to Canada and kill me. I originally wanted to dress up as a sexy Satan.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank God Culture Jenny was like, all right, no, stop.
I mean, it's actually, just to say one thing on the, it just shows how cyclical a lot of this stuff is in the Muslim majority world. I mean, when the show did first start back in 2011, right slap dab in the middle of the Arab Spring. And at the time, there was street protests all over, wasn't there? In Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria, in all sorts of places. And there was quite a lot of positivity that, you know, there was going to be these big democratic changes and stuff like that. And it ended up fizzling out. And obviously led to kind of a wider war in Syria as well. And it's kind of a little bit depressing, because you see these protests and stuff going on in Iran, and you really do hope that some good's going to come out of it. But time and time again, it ends up going nowhere. And it's really hard to be optimistic, especially when you look at something like the Arab Spring from 10 years ago. That, I mean, what came out of it in the long term that was positive? I don't think there was any real change in any of those countries, were there?
Well, Tunisia suddenly has sex education in schools.
Yeah, Tunisia's probably one place where they've had a few changes, haven't they? But
well, that's the origin of Arab Spring.
Yeah, but when you look at Egypt and Syria and other countries where I mean, particularly in Egypt, obviously it didn't work out too well, did it? I mean, after I can't remember who was the dictator in charge back then. I can't even think of his name now. Yeah, once he got removed, then you had the Brotherhood, then you had the army take over, and then it's just kind of been one chaotic situation after another.
Yeah, but look, I used to think that Islam was the worst thing, that this was going to be the source of all evil. Now look what we've got. We've got fucking Russia doing it. You know, I really thought we could trust Russia now. I really thought, Russia would be, like a partner, that a reliable trade partner, somebody who was going to integrate into all the other countries, and tit for tat, you get this, we get this, everybody benefits. And now look, everything destroyed. Unbelievable. So it's not only Islam, it's the stupidity of people.
Oh no! I mean, I've never thought it was. I mean, Islam is just.
I thought so. He had me fooled.
I've never been that down in it. I mean, I obviously I see Islam as a problem in the world, but it's certainly not the only one. There's plenty of other difficulties we're dealing with. So, but yeah, Russia is that's a whole nother show.
I'm an old gullible fool. I believe anything and everything.
All right, do you guys want to continue with the video?
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry for that.
No worries. Sorry, I love the tangents as well, right? So it's just keep them coming.
Now for more on this, we are being joined by M. Amiri from Oslo. He's the director of an NGO named Iran Human Rights. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, my first question to you is, at a time when all eyes are on Iran, one would expect that morality police will be more cautious with its response. But reports show that another woman has fallen victim to their crackdown. Are you seeing any signs of the situation getting better for the Iranian women?
Before the gentleman answers, what would you guys say is your personal answer to that?
Sorry, I had to move away.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm sorry.
Sorry, what was the question there, Colt?
So after so this lady here on Ninja Dutta asks this gentleman on the right, all eyes would be on Iran, especially after another girl has died. You'd think that they'd get their act together, but obviously they're not. What do you think is going on? Is essentially the question.
Well, in terms of what do you think that Iran will do in the wake of
Yeah,
this, or
yeah. Do you think they should be acting better, or what steps do you think they would do to, in a PR perspective, essentially in a summary?
in a
Let's see.
PR
The
sense?
survey says, have you seen Family Feud?
Yeah.
Survey says no.
Yeah, I mean, I'd unless unless you get a series of these and you get more situations like this, I can't really see much changing. I think they're just going to play it down as much as they can until the media attention disappears, because the news cycle will move to something else eventually. So I really don't see there's going to be much change. I think Iran will just double down and carry on.
Yeah. All right, let's play it here and let's see what the gentleman has to say.
You see that the protests that started or were triggered by the murder of Masa Amini, as you said in the report, by the morality police, they have now become a nationwide protest against the Islamic Republic of Iran. So people have had enough of 43 years of oppression by highly incompetent and corrupt authorities. So what we see now on the streets is actually they want to have a fundamental change where all human beings have their basic human rights. So it started with protecting for women rights and protesting against the suppression of women. Now is a protest that wants fundamental change. The young girls that you see in the street are beaten and murdered. They are beaten by the security.
Are you guys the only ones that are getting an issue hearing what he has to say?
I have no
Yeah.
idea what he's saying, because even when you do hear him, I can't understand what the hell he's on about.
Yeah, it's quite
It sounded like
soft.
it was
Quite
breaching
soft.
up a little bit.
Yeah. All right, let's continue. Let's see if he revises what he says or something.
Today, according to Iran, at least 200, more than 200 people have been killed last 3 weeks during the protests, and as you said, more than 20 of them are children.
Absolutely. Now, the latest protester to die is just 16 years old, as we just discussed. She was essentially a child. Do you think there is any limit to Iran's suppression?
Unfortunately, what we have seen both before and also during these protests, that Iranian authorities are willing to go very far to hold on the power. Last time we had nationwide protests in November 2019. They shut down the internet and they killed, according to some reports, up to 1,500 people. And at that time, the protests stopped. But this time, they have been using the same methods. They shoot at people, they beat them, as you say. Some of them are children, young girls who just go out and they just take off their headscarves and chant that we want freedom, and they are beaten to death. So we are very concerned that.
First of all, I just read the wording down there. She's 16 years old and she got hit because she lit her hijab on fire. First of all, when I was 16, the only protest I was even scared to protest against my homework, let alone protest a authoritarian regime like this. So I gotta give kudos that she faced such a regime, and then this is what she gets for showing such courage. That's what gets me for that.
Yep, agree.
If the international community doesn't show a strong reaction to the Iranian authorities, they might go very far in killing these innocent protesters who are just calling for their fundamental rights, and the human casualties will increase significantly.
Exactly. I was just going to come to that. I wanted to ask about the global aspect of it. The protests have long spilled outside the Iranian borders. Some have even taken place in your own city. So how do you think the international community can make a change in Iran?
Before this gentleman answers, because we probably can't understand half of it, what do you guys say to that question?
Okay, here
Well,
I'm pessimistic.
Yeah, I mean, so I couldn't hear a lot of what he was saying, but yeah, it sounds like he's just, as negative about it as we are in terms of potential
but he's
change.
talking a lot without actually saying much. He's just saying, "Oh, there's a lot happening," but what is the consequence? Is something going to happen? I'm not sure he's going to answer.
Yeah, I mean, the fact this guy is based in Norway, and is it Iran Human Rights Organization he's part of, or
yes, and so from his accent and from his name, he is from Iran.
Yeah, so I mean, it's telling, isn't it, that he's based out of Norway and not living in Iran. So
yeah, but you can't. You have to. All the people that I know left Iran. I mean, I'm still in touch. I still have friends. You know, it's amazing how many people actually left Iran. And I still come across them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising with the state of the place, but at the same time, when you see the surveys and everything that talk about how many people are no longer Orthodox Muslims in the country, and you'd think that would potentially allow some kind of permanent pushback towards the Islamic authorities, but I don't think they're going to go down without a fight. So I think it's going to get more ugly.
Yeah, what would you say in terms of so this lady here asked what the international protest should take place, or what kind of things should the international community do to help with this? What would you guys say to that before this gentleman gives his answer?
Oh, no more invasions, please. Let's not get any of those stupid ideas again. I think we've meddled enough. I mean, I think it's good to give support in whatever way you can to the protest movements if you can contribute financially.
Yeah, but I'm pessimistic. I don't think there's going to be much happening, because you can have like some superficial sanctions, but that's basically it.
Yeah, and normally those sanctions just end up hurting the ordinary people. So, yeah, I just think keeping media attention on it and making sure that the protest is known around the world, I think that's probably as best as you can do. You can't. The West has meddled enough in the in Muslim majority countries, and it's always disastrous. So you can't start talking about, let's put boots on the ground or regime change, and these horrible ideas. That's not going to achieve anything. So yeah, in my opinion, best you can do is just be vocally supportive of it and keep it in the media.
The nicest protest that I saw, I can't remember if this was in Paris or Berlin or something, where you had a handful of maybe 20 or something women who were protesting with open boobs, against the suppression of the hair, going like exactly the other way, saying, well, come on, not only can we go topless on the head, but also topless from the waist up.
The cynic in me says there seems to be a reason you might have liked that protest, Stop. Sorry. Let's not lower the tone any further.
No, but you're right. I mean, I have very fond memories when it comes to Iran, and when it comes to the girls in Iran prior to 79, of course, because this is when you are coming of age, and of course you experiment, and in those days it was great.
So what do you think, Rob? Any ideas on this one?
Yeah, I'm not so sure. So I don't generally comment on the geopolitical breakdown.
Fair
Not
enough.
my area of expertise.
Should we crack
But
on with the
Rob,
video?
what would interest me is your opinion. Do you see that Islam has much to do with all this? Do you think that what they are really doing is doing a favor to Islam here?
Well, of course, they're following, whatever sort of jurisprudence they think they're interpreting from the book. And so, in that sense, I guess they are. And they're obviously not concerned with outside views, generally speaking, because why would they care? If you were a consistent Muslim and you were taking the particular view that they are, well, then, you're interpreting the word of God. So who is it? Why would we listen to any other humans, right? And if people are disobeying, well, part of that is punishment, whether it's here on earth or in the afterlife, right? So there is a precedent for this sort of thing. And, I don't see them looking at it and going, we're not doing Islam a favor. We're following Islam. If people disagree, well, they've just got it wrong and we've got it right. So,
So you
that's
think
how I
they don't
see the
care?
sort of zealot view. Yeah.
Okay. Because this is one factor where I always say, I'm very curious about your line of reasoning, because this is what I always say. Why would humans need to intervene in the first place when there is this celestial judgment court thing
Exactly.
going on anyway? So
Yeah,
for
that's a
me,
good
this is a
point,
bit...
right? And they'll say things like, well, hey, we've got to avoid further, degradation of society or all of those sort of things. But on the other hand, and I've challenged Muslims on this as well, the idea of a test. I think this idea of a test is, barely coherent, and certainly Muslims don't follow it. And what I suppose I
Exactly.
mean by that is if you take a test to be, in this case, some sort of unpleasant state of affairs that somebody wouldn't otherwise choose, then and if you take it, and I have asked Muslims this, if you take it that the greater the test, the greater the reward, well then you shouldn't be helping anybody else because you don't know whether Allah is in fact wanting that to be the case, and in fact if they were to have a greater reward. And number two, if you were that sort of Muslim and you did believe the greater the test, the greater the reward, then you would seek a greater test. In other words, you wouldn't look for comfort, you'd look for discomfort in some way that you think glorifies Allah, so that you would be in a perpetual state of discomfort. Because remember, the claim is that, hey, this is just a fleeting moment here, right? This is maybe 60, 70, if you're lucky, 90 years, and you have an eternity in the highest level of heaven if, in fact, you pass this at the highest level. So shouldn't you then be looking for it? And on the same sort of view, what you would also want to do if you were consistent is not want to have your child get past the age of accountability or puberty, right? Because then the chances of them going to heaven are at least somewhat reduced, if not drastically reduced. So there's all of these sort of things that go into what I think is just this crazy idea of a test.
Yeah, then the other thing is, of course, that this God created this woman in exactly this way, knowing full well what she was going to be doing. So all she was doing is actually behaving in the way that she was programmed and created to do by her God. So what they are doing by extension is that they are punishing the product of their God.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but then
She was following Islam, and they are the one who are judging her, knowing that Allah is the final judge. They they are not even allowed to judge her.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah,
stops.
exactly. But they created, I mean, their God created this woman exactly like this, to do exactly what she was doing. So she's only doing what her God told her to do. And these people are now punishing her for what her God, their God made her to do. Oh my God, this is crazy.
Yeah, stops. In this case, wouldn't you say that this kind of stuff is more of a class-based issue than it is a religious-based issue? Because like this kind of stuff is happening no matter what the religion is, right?
Well, yeah, but this is it shows you that the God figure here is a human product. It's just a figment of a human imagination where it doesn't make sense. It gets totally illogical if you really think it through. Because if a God knows what this God is doing and is not like a totally incompetent buffoon, it doesn't make sense, does it?
There's a further problem on that life as a test. Actually, there's 100 different problems I can see with it as a claim. But you'll also have Muslims who'll say, if you bring up like a baby dying, say like in the tsunami back in, what was it, 2004 or whenever it was, and there were thousands of children who's been washed out into the sea, and you say, well, how was that? You know, how was their life a test? And you'll get the answer, oh no, that was a test for their parents. Well, then I mean, not only is that an incredibly morally awful kind of proposition to put out there, but it's also immediately contradicted the original claim, which is that life is a test. Well, it doesn't always seem to be a test, because if it's a test, it's a test for that person. But if you die at 6 months old in a flood, what kind of test do you have? You're supposed
Stubbs,
yeah,
I got
but you know, no. So thinking clear too, there's a hadith who's telling you about that, where some children died, and Aisha is talking to Muhammad about the stuff, exactly about the stuff. So they were sorry that the child was dead, and then Aisha said, "Oh, at least this child was innocent and will go straight to heaven." And then Muhammad said, No, you don't know for what this child was created for, right? So maybe it was created for hell. That's why you don't know that, because Allah is the final judge.
Well, yeah, they still have to account for themselves on Judgment Day. This is what I've been told by Muslims, and I don't know where they get this from, but I've been told that if you don't have the test within your life, then you've got the test on Judgment Day in front of Allah. Now, that seems completely random to me, but the point is, it contradicts the claim that life is a test, because it obviously isn't a test.
Yes, it is. Yeah, right.
And supposedly, you're supposed to agree to this test before you even come into the human life, aren't you? You're supposed to know Allah, and you have this little deal with him. This is how it's been explained to me by Muslims. You have this discussion with Allah in paradise, heaven, wherever, and then you get born, and then you live your life, because this is to explain away why you have atheists as well, and 80% of the population is not Muslim, because you've made this deal, so you are stuck to it. But once you're born, you don't remember it, but you still have to adhere to the agreement you made with Allah. But again, if you die at 6 months old, what was the test? I mean, it's incoherent as a concept.
Yeah, it's a contradiction, because the Quran tells us clearly that some people are created for hell. So there is no test. It's
well, there's that aspect as well, yeah, and also you have to think about people with severe mental illnesses and that kind of thing. Why does Allah make a test with, make an agreement for a test with someone, and then makes them so severely mentally ill that they can't function, and they can't, they're not in a position where they can choose to be a Muslim or anything like that. So again, it's what was the point of that? How is the test being fulfilled there?
Look, if you try to steel man it as best you could, maybe they could say something like, well, the test is for the soul, right? It's not for it's partly the physical body, but the soul is somehow in interaction, some sort of interaction with the physical body. And so the soul is being tested. So even with a baby, even though the baby's not at a cognitive ability to be judged, the test is still for the soul. Maybe they could say something like that for every single, and that would sort of maybe overcome it in some way, because then the cognitively impaired, or those, as you say, that don't have the ability to recognize their surroundings, or they're completely delusional, or they're very young, or they're very old, then the test would still apply, but it wouldn't apply to them in the way that we think of it, as in like the physical hardship in that sense. Or maybe there would be with maybe with a death or whatever, but certainly it's a test for the soul itself. Maybe they could try something like that. I'm not sure where they'd find that in the book, but maybe they could dream that up as some sort of response.
No. Sharia excludes this. Sharia is very, very clear. And it says there are exceptions to the rule. One of them is mentally retarded.
But the problem with that is that ultimately the test still comes down to whether you believe in Allah or not, and whether you're willing to worship Allah. So that is the fundamental test. So even I'm not sure in what sense that could be a test for the soul. because it's not just hardship. It's saying, yes, you go through hardship, but still fundamentally you'll throw yourself at Allah's feet. That is supposed to be whether you pass or fail the test. So that can't be some kind of ethereal, spiritual soul test, as far as I can see, because it has a concrete result that you have to be worshipping Allah to pass the test.
Yeah, but
So
it's
for
not
me,
the
that
physical body.
Well, I mean, obviously, some of them think that even if you don't worship Allah, you've got the innate fitra, right? And say if you just do good deeds as if you were a Muslim, but you don't actually know that Muhammad was the last messenger, for example, but you somehow quote unquote spiritually connected to Allah, well, then you'll be judged in heaven. And my view is always, well, let those people do that, because the moment you do dawah, and especially if you do poor dawah, which is what most dawah people do,
yeah,
you are then potentially condemning them to hell, because now they have got the message, they've rejected it. Although, again, you could argue on the other side, I suppose, that, hey, Allah's just, but then the idea is that rather don't do that, because then really what you would need is some sort of a divine test that Dawagandists would have to pass. And if they passed the test, then they could go out there. But if you didn't pass the test, which most Dawagandists wouldn't do, then you could very well end up condemning somebody to hell, where otherwise they might have been judged to have been a good person, but now they reject Islam because it's bad dawah, and they go to hell for that reason. But I guess they'll want to push back on that in some way, I'm sure.
But you know, that there are verses in the Quran where it clearly says that those people who behave like the non-believers, who can be following the right path, it's Allah's decision, because He's the one who leads them astray or leading them to the right path, right? So it's His responsibility. This is like a contradiction, right?
Yeah, look, they'll never accept that, no matter how clear it is. I just think also, by the way, I know the video. I'm not sure how far you want to go with the video, Nick. Do you want to go through the whole thing? Because at this rate, it might take us 3 hours. So I'm just conscious that you might want to finish the video or not. Up to you entirely.
Yeah, there's one
'Cause
more.
we can chat
minute, I
about
think.
various aspects like this for hours, I think,
Yeah.
between us.
Yeah, there's one more minute of this, and I also had, just to be prepared, I had another video by our good friend Sajid Lippam as well. But yeah, we can worry about that once this 1 minute's over. All right, let's continue here.
Well, the change must come from inside. The change will come by the Iranian people, like, any major change in any dictatorship.
I have to say I agree with the gentleman here, because I met a lot of people from Iran, a lot of smart people, a lot of intelligent people come from there. So I'm pretty sure they're more than happy to set up their own government without any intervention.
The drivers of this change are these young girls and boys and men and women inside the country. But what the international community can do is to force Iran to limit the human casualties. So I think that the international community must send a united warning to the Iranian authorities, and they must also establish mechanisms at the UN to hold those responsible for these atrocities.
Well, that's the issue, right? Because Iran doesn't give a shit. If it did give in a piece of fuck about what the international community thought, it wouldn't have done this in the first place.
Right. How do they force them? By saying, "Oh, we will not buy oil from you," or whatever? Right. What is the method?
Because the only way I see this going through is like a white person telling their kids that there's going to be a timeout. Like, there's nothing that's going to happen by the international community telling them with words. And then the only way that we can actually threaten as an international community would be with intervention or like an invasion, which is something that we don't want to do. Because the last time we did it, we fucked it up royally.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue here.
Cities for shooting at people responsible, and this can be done if the international community stands together supports Iranian people's demands of fundamental human rights and establish mechanisms to hold Iranian leaders accountable. I think that's what international community can do and must do.
Right. Okay, we will leave it to that. Thank you for speaking with us, Mr. Emamiri.
Thank you so much.
All right, so let's remove this. How was it? Or your opinions, final thoughts on that video?
Oh, it's all very depressing, isn't it, in Iran? Yeah, I don't really think I've got much more to say other than I've already said while it was running. But...
Yeah, this still happens in the 21st century. Is really a scandal, and future generations will look back on this, I hope. Like I said earlier, in the same way we look at slavery and so forth now, they will look back on this as like a very unsophisticated group of people who were barely above sort of animal status, and then that's probably an insult to some animals.
Yeah. Stops, what about you?
No, there's nothing that I can add. That's exactly it. Like I said, I'm pessimistic. I don't think much is going to change. I think Islam is stronger than this, and they want to suppress women, and that's what they're going to do.
Yeah. And I think we had like a nice view from like a neutral platform or from a Western platform here. I have another video of a gentleman who represents or who claims to represent the true Islam here. If you guys want to watch it.
Okay, I'm not that interested in that, I must admit, because it's a personal opinion of someone.
Oh, it's Sajid Lippo.
Yeah, but I would much rather prefer Rob telling us this refutation syllogism.
Oh, sure, yeah,
this
I forgot
has
about
more
that.
impact on what we are doing on a daily basis.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so
okay,
Rob,
sure.
I'll hand it over to you,
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so this argument is, you may have heard of it. Some people think that it's got a defeater to it. I've looked at the defeater, and it's called the logical problem of evil. Now, there's two versions of the problem of evil. One is the logical problem, which says that, you have a deductive argument that ends in God does not exist. What we mean here is that it's impossible for God to exist. There exists a logical contradiction with evil and God's nature that makes it the case that God doesn't exist. The other view, which is the one that's, I guess, more debated in philosophy, is the evidential problem. And the evidential problem says there's this evidence that makes it a case that God is more likely doesn't exist because of all this evil. Now, there's various arguments in favor, and there's various, what's the word for it? There's various defenses to this. There's a specific name they use for it. It just escapes me at the moment. So things like the free will defense, soul building, etc. Right? So there's a number of defenses against it. But none of those defenses work against the logical problem. The logical problem is a much stronger argument, and it requires, it ultimately means that you've got to make a very strong claim that it's impossible for God to exist. Now, most atheists won't do that, either because they don't feel like they can, or they're maybe not comfortable with this argument, or whatever the case is. But it does rely on the interlocutors agreeing that God is maximally powerful or omniscient. If they, you don't have to quibble too much about that. I mean, most people realize that God won't do something that's logically impossible, or can't do something that's logically impossible. Things like create a squared circle, or a married bachelor, or both exist and not exist at the same time, or whatever the case is. So most people that have at least a modicum of understanding will accept omniscience or being maximally powerful. And I think, to me and most people, that's interchangeable. So it needs to be maximally powerful, all-knowing, so that he knows all true propositions, and omnibenevolent, that is perfectly moral. That is, and this is where this particular argument.
Oops.
I cannot hear Bob. Rob.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now we can.
You conked out.
Oh dear. I'm just going to swap over so I can read it. Tell me if this conks out as well.
No, we cannot hear you now.
Oh, that's weird.
Now
okay.
we can hear
I wonder
you.
if I can.
We can
I
hear
wonder
you
if I can share my screen. Oh, actually, let me just read it off another off another device. That's weird. When I go to my notes on my phone, because I am doing this on the phone, then you somehow lose me, which is very strange.
Maybe it switches
Sorry,
off in the
give me-
background.
Yeah, it must take it to the background. Just give me 1 second. I'm just doing something. I just want to pick up.
Because
Pick it up
Doorknob
on
makes a good point, because this is the one that I always maintain. Whether it ends in God does not exist or good God does not exist, because normally what the proposition is that there's well, either benevolent or omni something God who is overly moral and therefore cannot be bad or shouldn't be able to be bad.
But isn't it like the claim from Muslims, or at least I heard it a lot, that that God is not the all-loving God. He's he's doing his stuff. The all-loving God is like the something which the Christians are suggesting, and only
Yeah.
specific Christians.
So what we don't want to
if
say
it's
here that
all
it's all loving.
merciful, all loving, and all just, then it can't.
Merciful and just doesn't mean loving.
Yeah, we don't need to go
That's
down
why
the
I said
loving route.
merciful and loving and just.
Yeah, so for this, all we need is that God is perfectly moral, right? And so we need to just sort of explain that as well.
Objectively
And I'm just trying to find another device, otherwise it disappears here. So I think give me 1 second. All I'm going to do.
Because we had this argument last week on the Atheism TV on the German side, because we also had this argument. And we also argued that if you have a God that is benevolent and merciful, it cannot be bad. And if it can't be bad, it cannot be immoral. And if it can't be immoral, it can't be inflicting suffering on the people. Therefore, this God is impossible, can't exist.
Yeah,
and this
so
is
let
the
me
point that Doorknob is
exactly.
making, is that the good God cannot exist.
Well, but here's the thing, right? So if you define God as omnibenevolent, or you could interchange that if they don't like that word because they think it's a Christian word, you can just say he's God perfectly moral. But we've just got to define perfectly moral, right? And what you don't need to do here, so you've got to be careful not to go in the weeds. And I've done this with about 30, 40, maybe even as many as 50 Christians and Muslims. So I've been doing this quite a bit on Clubhouse. These are not, they're not like, most of them are not philosophy experts, but they're reasonable people that can think to some degree. And I'll tell you later on afterwards if you want the common objections as well and how you can respond to it. But I think I'm moving.
You cut out again.
You said I'm moving, and when you said it.
As soon as I do that, right, it disappears. Okay, so I might have to just swap between it because for whatever reason, I cannot pick this up anywhere else on any of my other devices for some odd reason. Because what I wanted to do is just bring it up to read it off another device for you, and that way it's just be very simple for me to do it. But for some reason, I'm just not able to see it on any other device. So I'll just swap between it and read it. So here's the first premise, right? If God exists, then God is a perfectly moral being. Right, so that premise just needs unpacking a little bit. So perfectly moral being there. Perfect means that I understand perfect to mean, and you need to get agreement with your interlocutor. Perfect means that it's not improvable.
Helium?
Can you hear me?
Are you breathing helium?
I can hear you fine.
Trying to talk normally.
No, I can
Because
hear
suddenly you're talking one octave higher and much faster.
So I can hear you perfectly, Rob.
Okay, so I wonder if it's on Stops' end then. That's weird. Can everybody else hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay. All right, Stops. Hopefully you can hear me at least. So let me just say it again. Hopefully it comes through here. Because what I'm doing is flipping between I just don't have another way to do this. Where I don't have to swap between this. I didn't expect to do this now, so I apologize for, not sort of being ready because it wasn't something I was thinking about doing. I know what I can do, actually. Give me a second.
No, just go for it, Rob. I mean, even if it's from the top of your head, even if it's just the gist of it.
So I think just for recording's sake, it's probably going to be useful if I can read it. If I can read it off to you and just qualify it, because you can always come back, if you want to the recording and so forth. But I think this is very strong. I've not heard a rebuttal
It was perfect. It's just that, and Culture Jenny also says it sounds like Donald Duck. So you were just speeding up, and that's it.
Am I good now, though? Am I coming through consistently, decently now?
Yeah, fine.
Rob, can you maybe
cool.
post the premises in the private chat, and then you can kind of read them off there without having to swap between devices?
Yeah, let me try that for you here, just so that I posted it. Let's just see if the beauty of Mac works here.
Shit, Rob and his Mac.
Oh, no, you can't. No, you can't. You're limited with how many things there. I'd have to post it to you separately, unfortunately. Right, let me just go through it. I think this is the easiest.
Just go.
I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to tell you what you need to do with it. So it goes like this. Logical problem is premise 1, if God exists, then God is a morally perfect being. Premise 2, the world is morally imperfect now. Premise 3, if God is a morally perfect being, then prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. That's a very important one. Each one of these are very important. They build on the next one. Premise 4, if God is a morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world. Premise 5, if prior to creating anything, the world was morally perfect, and the world is morally imperfect now, then the actions of God has decreased the degree of moral perfection in the world.
Yes.
Now, there are 5 conclusions that lead to a final conclusion, but I will summarize it as follows. There is a logical contradiction if you accept all 5 of these premises, and the logical contradiction is that his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world, and that his actions has decreased the moral perfection in the world. And therefore you have a contradiction, and God does not exist. Right? So I could give you the premises, but it would just make it longer. It's not necessary, right? That's all you need.
I understand it 100%.
So the important things, if you're going to present this to somebody, is to clarify what you mean by morally perfect. So by morally perfect, I mean at least, and you want to get agreement, that it's action. So morally means action guiding norms. So it's statements that guide our actions, or another way you could phrase it is something that ought not be done. Right? And when you say ought not be done, you're only ever talking from God's point of view. Don't let them try and sidetrack you by saying, oh, well, we humans think differently. We could. No. This is not about the humans. This is simply about God itself, right? And more sophisticated interlocutors will agree that the moral essence of God being a moral agent, his essence, that is his nature, is what makes things good. So whenever he makes an utterance, or he brings forth any action, then that action is a result of his nature, right? Because otherwise you could run the Euthyphro dilemma, which we won't go into now, and that's problematic. So they want to say, more sophisticated people that understand this slightly better will want to say that it's his nature that makes everything good, because you don't want to peel outside of God. That means God is subject to something outside of himself. So what they want to say is he is good, right? The God himself is good, and he's a moral agent. Otherwise he couldn't issue moral commands. And so by moral here, we mean something that ought be done or ought not be done by God's standard, or action guiding norms, things that guide actions, both God's or ours. And how does that happen? Through God's nature, ultimately. And then perfect simply means it cannot be improved upon, right? So it's at a maximal level. There's no improvement that's possible. Perfection is unimprovable, is another way of thinking that. Once they agree with that, then we go to premise 2, the world is morally imperfect now. Now, some people have pushed back on this and go, what do you mean by world? Here, world simply means, it's a philosophical term that means all of reality, but it's just truncated to the word world, which means all of reality. Because of course, God himself, prior to creating anything, there was no moral imperfection if he was morally perfect, which is what the first premise states. So most people, again, will accept that there's moral imperfection now. And of course, they're not thinking about God, but they are thinking about, God's creatures, us, in other words. We are morally imperfect. Therefore, there's moral imperfection in the world, and the world is simply all of reality. Then premise 3, I've actually swapped this around because I prefer it this way, having done this now with a number of people. If God is a morally perfect being, then prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. Now, this is important, and here's why. Because it means that if they accept this, it means that God did not have to create. And this is very important, because if it were the case that God had to create, had to bring forth creation, then this argument wouldn't work. But the fact that God has got free will in whatever sense, and that's entirely problematic in and of itself, but we're not going to argue that at the moment. Most theists will accept, in fact, everyone that I've run into will say that God did not have to create. In other words, another way you can think about this is that creation is a free gift. God wasn't obligated to create. He's necessary. He's not contingent. He's not required, and something else isn't required for him to be God. And so creation is something that he chose to do, but he could have chosen otherwise. That's very, very important, right? Once they agree to that, then you're in a very strong position. Because now it's the case that anything that comes as a result of creation was an act that God brought into existence, and that he knew the future, which is why he's got to be omniscient as well. So he knows all future propositions that are going to be true. And what we mean by true there is that will happen, right? Because you can't have a future proposition or a future state of affairs that doesn't happen. That would be false, right? So he knows all true propositions, and that includes all future ones. Now, there are some people who think that they're called open theists. So there's some people who think that God doesn't know the future in that way. They think that God knows all possible states of affairs, but he actually doesn't know which one they're going to take. But that undermines his omniscience. Right now, you're saying that this being actually, in fact, doesn't know exactly what is going to happen in the future. He just knows like a maze. He knows all possible options, but he doesn't know which one is going to be taken. So that wouldn't really work. That would just undermine God. So open theism is not a good response to try and get out of this. So once you've got to premise 3, where they've agreed that creation wasn't necessary, that it was a free act of God, then we move to premise 4. And premise 4 is, if God is a morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world. I've got a number of people have objected to this. But if you think about it, all this is saying here is it's like, in a sense, it's like a restatement of premise 1, right? If God exists, then he's a morally perfect being. And we agreed originally that morally perfect means only things that ought be done. All right. And if that's the case, then this premise is reiterating that in a different way. It's just saying that if he's morally perfect, then his actions can't decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world. Why not? Because that's what moral perfection means. It means that you can only do things that are in alignment with your nature, and your nature is morally perfect, and therefore it's only things that ought be done. And then the final premise is, this is obviously where most people object, because if they don't object to this, then God doesn't exist. If they've accepted everything else and they accept this last premise, then God doesn't exist. So most people will object to premise 5, which is, if prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect, which was premise 3, and the world is morally imperfect now, which was premise 2, then the actions of God has decreased the degree of moral perfection, right? That it almost sounds like a conclusion, and in some senses it's like a semi-conclusion, because if you agree that this is true, then ultimately the conclusions do follow logically, and God doesn't exist. So that's where most of the pushback will come, and most of the pushback comes in the form of the free will defense. But hang on a moment, God gave us all free will. Now there's a number of responses you can have to this. You can say, for example, hang on, what do you mean by free will here? Because you can appeal to heaven, and you can ask them. There's a number of options that they can go, and I say to them, for example, do people have free will in heaven? And a lot of theists say yes, it does. And I say, is there any evil in heaven? They say no. I say, okay, so you now do have a state of affairs where you can have free will and nobody chooses to do evil, right? And of course, once they realize that, now you'll sort of have some backtracking, or you'll have people wanting to claim something else at this stage. Now they'll shift the goalpost. The other option is, if they know this, then they might say something a bit more advanced, which is they might say, oh, no, you can only have morally significant free will if you can, in fact, choose evil and you actualize some evil. Because if it's the case that you know the difference between good and evil, and you only ever choose the good, well, then you don't have morally significant free will. This is sort of Alvin Plantinga's response that some philosophers have taken to be a very strong response against the logical problem. I've read it, and I don't think so. And the reason why is because, of course, creation wasn't necessary. That's the key premise there, right? Creation wasn't necessary, and Plantinga thinks that that either creation is necessary or that God couldn't have created, morally perfect creatures, because otherwise they wouldn't have this morally significant free will. And in order to have this greater virtue, which is morally significant free will, then you've got to be able to actually choose the evil and actualize it. The problem, in my view, with that is, well, hang on a moment, but God has the ultimate, free will, doesn't he? He's the ultimate moral arbiter, and at no point did he have to choose any evil or actualize evil, to know what evil is and to be morally perfect. So to me, I don't think that this response is a good one. Or maybe there's something I'm missing, but I just don't see this as being a good response. So you will typically run into free will. The problem with free will, apart from anything else, is, like I say, is that creation had to happen. Creation did not have to happen, which means that if there was no creation, then the world, i.e. God alone, which they agreed to earlier, then there would be moral perfection. The moment he created, and he knew that he was going to create what's called creatures with trans-world depravity. So the idea is that
With what?
at least by Alvin, trans-world depravity is the idea that God could not create morally perfect beings, because if he did so, they wouldn't have this morally significant free will. So they are created with a built-in, let's just call it mechanism, where they are going to fail at some point. Every single human being, apart from Jesus, apparently, is going to fail. And that's what gives them this morally significant free will. And that's better than a world where they only do the good. Now, that's a more advanced response. You won't hear that from most people. You probably hear, well, you've got free will, and then you can just explain to them, just ask them about heaven. And if they agree that heaven doesn't contain evil and has free will, then of course their objection about having free will on earth, by their understanding, wouldn't work. But the more advanced version is this idea that you don't have morally significant free will. And the significance there is that humans have to be built non-perfectly so that they have this ability to choose. And that's a greater virtue than just having, let's just call it, standard free will. This morally significant free will is greater than having a standard free will. But then you can't run the heaven example, because they're just going to say, well, hang on a moment, in heaven, you don't have morally significant free will because, there is no evil in heaven. You could point out that then heaven is undermined. Then you have a state of affairs that's supposed to be greater than earth, where in fact you have a seemingly lower level, a lower virtue of free will. But you can also point out that that's not necessary for God, right? And the problem here is, what they want to say is, well, hang on a moment, God's created this free will, and there's a greater good that comes from this. Right? That's what people want to say with a free will. Yes, there's free will. Yes, there's some evil, but actually there's a greater good. But that doesn't work here for this problem, because the moment there's any evil, there's a reduction in the degree of moral perfection. And that's exactly what this argument sees. If there's any reduction in the level of morals in the world, then God cannot exist. And what I think a lot of people, to my mind, confuse is that, hang on, you can have this evil, but there's this greater good. But remember that he was morally perfect before there was any creation, and you cannot improve upon moral perfection. Right, so the whole idea of creation, at best, if you were to give it the best thing you could possibly steel man it, is that you've got some evil to bring you back to moral perfection, because you can't improve upon moral perfection. But then, of course, you have this evil which wasn't necessary, and and God did not have to do this. And prior to creation, there was no evil. So, to my mind, none of those arguments work. And so, this is the reason why I think this is extraordinarily powerful. If you go through it and you understand those points, then you can run this against anybody that accepts the triomni God.
Well, Drastic Measures has put the whole thing in the chat, so into the comments, so anybody can see this. But Rob, this is definitely not something that I would recommend to beginners. I mean, this is something...
exactly. You'd have to read it. You'd have to probably listen to me do it with people. I listened to somebody on Clubhouse just a couple of times, and once I heard it once or twice, actually, I wish we could have him on here. He's probably one of the strongest debaters I've ever heard. He's very good with Islam. His name online is called Venus. He's very familiar with Islam, some of the intricacies of Islam, like you are, Stops. He's very philosophical literate. He's got a master's in philosophy. This was his argument. when I heard him run it a couple of times and I heard the responses, I went, this is brilliant. And I went and looked through it myself. I thought about it, and then I started to use it. But he'd done it a couple of times ahead of time. So I knew the typical responses that people give and his rebuttal. Now, he could probably say it even better than I'm giving it to you now. I'm just giving you my version of what he's given and the responses I've had, including a number of the rebuttals that he has given that I've just, reworded for you guys here and for myself.
I'm going to try the primitive version. I'll let you know how it went.
Yeah, I'll give you, because all you need is to run
because
through
there is a primitive version of this, Rob. Come on, I mean, you must be aware of this, because you have the baby version and you have the version that you just presented with all these intricacies.
The baby version.
Oh, there we go. Somebody, there you go. Drastic has put it into the main chat. I wonder if I can put this into the other chat. I think the normal chat will just.
It's
you
on
can't fit
both.
so many lines of texting.
It's
can
on
you,
both, Rob. I just said it's on both.
Yeah, I put it in both.
Oh, perfect.
I've had to break it up a bit because of the character limit.
Yeah, exactly. Did I give it to you before? Is that how you got it?
You did, yeah. I searched through my old messages and found it, so I've read.
Yeah, like I say to you, you can ignore.
I thought
for the
he
most
was
part,
clairvoyant, Rob. You can't destroy my whole thing. I really thought that there was some magic going on here.
I apologize.
Rob, can I ask you a question about this?
Yeah, sure.
Have you come across any theists who have rejected the premise that God could choose not to create? And the reason I asked that, oh, you haven't, because I'm sure I heard. I'm pretty sure it was a presuppositionalist who was talking about how it's because it's like it's a God property to create. Therefore,
exactly. Yeah,
there's a problem with this. Mm-hmm. I have heard this response, right? Okay, so let me pass that out very quickly for you. So there's a problem with this. If you're saying that one of God's great making properties is that he's a creator, then the question is the following: is he the greatest conceivable being without actualizing the attribute of creation or not? This is a yes or no. If the question is no, he needs to actualize. What that entails that he's contingent on some actualization. But no theist really wants to commit to that, because that means that God on his own isn't ultimately powerful. They require some action of God to make him God. Absent that action, he isn't God, because actualization makes him the great making person. So what they want to say is that he has an attribute, but he doesn't need to actualize it. So you just need to ask somebody who says, well, hang on a moment, he's a creator and that's a great making property. Then all you have to ask him is he the greatest conceivable being having the property, or does the property need to be actualized? If they say it's just having the property, well, then he doesn't need to actualize the property. He has the ability. It's like you have the ability to love, but you don't need to have a person to love. You know that you have it because you're an all-knowing being. You know you have the ultimate attributes. You don't need to actualize them. So just ask that question, and then I think that won't be a problem for you anymore. Because if they accept it, that he doesn't need to actualize it, well, then creation is still a free gift. And then it's a case that he wasn't obligated. Because if they accept that he is obligated, the further thing is that then he's contingent on that creation. In other words, the creation is necessary for him to be a great making being. And prior to that, they'd have to say that he wasn't great.
He can choose. And it's for the benefit of mankind that he does it, because he's so kind and so wonderful that he's giving the opportunity to the people that he's created to go to heaven with him.
I think I heard that notorious pre-sup on what's his name, Darth Dawkins.
He's a joke.
I think probably most people have heard of him. He's a very difficult character. But I've heard him say that God needed to create. Obviously, he's talking from a Christian perspective. God needed to create or have the Jesus aspect, because without the Son experiencing human love, God couldn't be all loving. I might not be expressing this that well, but
I don't think he'll say it that way. Yeah, I understand that view, right? But the view is that Jesus, the Father, and the Holy Spirit existed eternally as a triune, right? So there wasn't a creation process there. The creation process was simply to bring about the state of affairs for humans after creation. Prior to creation, there was still Jesus. He just wasn't in a human body. So I don't think that Darth or anybody else is going to say that the bodily creation or the earthly creation or indeed the universe is necessary for the triune God to be, great making God. So
Mm.
it's
Well,
still the
not
case that even under their view, creation is a free gift.
not
Is that where
necessary.
triads come from?
Well, I think he wouldn't say it was necessary for the triune God to exist. It would be necessary for God to be able to feel the full spectrum of lovingness. He would have to be as an individual on Earth to be able to experience the kind of equivalent of human love. Yeah.
Well, their view
I
is that,
apologize.
that God the Father loves the Son loves the Father, and they both love the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit loves them. So that love is already actualized, and it doesn't require actualization of creation. Because otherwise, again, they're back in the same position that now the triad is contingent on physical creation of human beings to actualize their love, which means that they can't be the greatest conceivable beings prior to some sort of creation. I don't think any theist will go that route. What I have heard a theist go is they deny, amazingly enough, that God is morally perfect. And the
Really?
distinction they want to make there, what the distinction, and actually it was quite a smart guy that I spoke to about this, the distinction they try to make is to say, well, hang on a moment, in order to be a moral agent, you've got to follow commands, right? It's action guiding norms. But hang on a moment, God is the ultimate. His actions aren't guided by anything, right? But he guides our actions, so he emanates commands to us, and we ought follow them, right? What ought be done by God's lights. But I have to remind them that, in fact, God is constrained, if you like, by his nature. And what is his nature? His nature is omnibenevolent, morally perfect. So any action is guided ultimately by God's nature, and so are we. So this attempted objection to say something like, well, God isn't actually morally perfect because he isn't a moral agent in the same way humans are, I think is also fails as far as I can tell.
Have you had any convincing attempts at rebutting this from Muslims, or is it mostly Christians you spoke to?
No, they'll do the same thing, right? And like I say, the immediate rebuttal from most people is the free will defense. But the free will defense, you can, as I say, you can appeal to heaven, or if they are a bit more articulate and they want to try the morally significant free will, then you can appeal to God or heaven again. But none of this actually works because remember, creation is a free gift. That is the most powerful thing. If there's any premise that is necessary for this, I mean, they're all necessary, but that one destroys the free will defense, as far as I can tell, at least, is that creation is a free gift. Because if there were no creation, there'd be no free will necessary. There'd be no instrumental evil. Remember, instrumental evil is simply the idea that there's some evil for some greater good. But what we talk about in evil is not instrumental evil. And this is again, sometimes theists want to try and play hide the ball. If they're a little bit more literate, they try to play hide the ball. What we mean by evil is simply something that ought not be done, all things considered. That's the phrase that comes afterwards. Right, and a good example of this, if that's not clear for anybody here or anybody listening, right? Think of the example of a child being vaccinated, right? If there wasn't a greater good, then we would say, sticking a needle into a child's arm without any greater good, that would be an evil act, right? But is it evil to vaccinate a child? Well, I think most of us are going to say, unless you're an anti-vaxxer or something, most of us are going to say yes, it's a good act, because that small amount of pain has in fact it's instrumental in what, having a greater good, which is some sort of greater immunity against the whatever the disease may be. So that wouldn't be considered, all things considered, an evil act. It would only be considered, all things considered, an evil act if you just jabbed the child and there was no greater good coming from it. But that's not what we mean by evil. That's not what theists mean by evil either. And so you wouldn't allow them to shift the goalpost and try and appeal to instrumental evil, because that's not what we're talking about.
I think that's good. I think this is really appropriate for the 11th anniversary.
You can bring anybody you want on. If you want to invite me on, it doesn't matter who it is. I'll run this against anybody and see.
Which is great.
If there's something I can't answer, I'll just go back to my philosophical mate here and say, here's a rebuttal. What do you think about this? If it's something that I've not yet come across something that I think has sort of stopped me in my tracks where I went, that's a good response. If they accept those premises all the way up to if they only object to number 5, I think they can't really escape. So what they'd have to do is try and muddy the waters somewhere else. The other thing they try and do is say the sort of idea of that there isn't actually evil in that sense, or that it's only human evil, but God's not evil, or whatever the case is. But if they're paying attention to the argument, that just doesn't work either. So I typically get something where they try and redefine evil, or they want to try and bring in the free will defense, or they want to say, as this one gentleman did, that, well, God is not a moral agent in the sense that we understand. But here's the other thing that happens with this, right? What sometimes you might hear people say something like, there's a creator-creature distinction. And what they want to try and say is, well, hang on, the creator is good, but he's good in a way that is not the same as what we understand. The problem with this is that unless you understand good, it's unintelligible. So all you're saying, really, it ultimately becomes the creator is blur blur, and we are doing whatever the actions are. But that doesn't work, because in order for us to do good, you have to have a moral standard. That's what most theists want to appeal to, even those that don't appeal to divine command theory. Divine command theory is that everything that comes from the divine is ultimately good because the divine is good, right? That's the idea. Now, there are people who try to avoid that. I think that can be problematic for them, but there are a few people out there that don't want to claim that. But most theists will say, well, God is the ultimate standard, and he's divine. Whatever utterance he makes is ultimately good because his nature, who he is as a being, is good. That doesn't tell us a lot, but we don't need to go into what the good is at the moment, or how they know that it's good. All we have to get them to agree is that God is morally perfect, right? And then the argument can proceed from there. And we just define moral perfection so that they don't try and change things. You might hear things like, oh, it's a privation of good. All I have to ask them, is it an action guiding norm? Because again, this is just muddying the water. You've got this idea of privation, right? Good is like the thing that exists, and evil is simply a privation. It's like taking away from the good. The good just is, the thing that exists in existence, and the evil is just a lesser version of this, right? It's a privation is the term given. But
Rob,
I just
takes
keep
hours.
asking them if it's an action guiding norm.
Exactly,
Say
but
again?
this takes hours to do this.
Well, I mean, typically I'll have a discussion. Sometimes I have with some interesting and honest theists, it has taken more than an hour. Sometimes it'll take 10, 15 minutes. All I need them to agree on is ultimately the first 3, perhaps 4 premises. I know they're going to reject premise 5. Sometimes they reject premise 4. And like I said, the other day, they rejected premise 1. So it can take a while if they try and reject any of the premises.
Okay,
but that's why you've got to just
why
be
don't
clear
you
on
do
what
the
your
baby
standard
version?
is.
Because I would
Give me the baby
suggest
version.
using the baby version, where you just say, okay, look, before God created, was it morally perfect? Yeah, sure. I mean, they need to agree with that. And then you can just say, well, today it's not. So what is the difference between then and now? Well, it's God's actions. So God's action is what actually corrupted the world. Full stop.
Yeah, but that's where you'll get the free will defense. And if you don't have some of those other premises in, it can appear, not to you necessarily, but it
It's
can
not
appear
about the
like they've
free
given a
will.
rebuttal.
But Bob, it's not about the
really
free will
It's just the action of a God.
of God.
It's not
exactly.
You don't need to go to this level of the free will. You can stay on top of the basic. The basic premise here is, number one, God existed in a perfect world. Number two, today we don't have a perfect world. The difference is God. So therefore, this God cannot exist in this way that it's a perfect God. So it's a corrupt God. And this is what I call the baby
you're not
version,
even going to
because
say
you
it's a
don't have to
corrupt
go
God.
through the free will thing.
Well, you're not even going to say it's a corrupt God. You would say that God doesn't exist. But that's why you do have to, I think it's absolutely crucial. However you do it, you could try the mini version. I think you just might have more pushback on that. Because this argument, why I like it, is because it eliminates one after another. Once they agree, it just eliminates that they can go back to and try and wiggle out of it. With your one, I think they could try and wiggle out of it here and there. But I think what is crucial is to get them to agree to the tri-omni God. If they don't agree to that, right? And like I say, you have open theists, people who think that God doesn't know, the true state of affairs in the future. You also have the other objection to this, by the way, just in case you come up against it, is something called skeptical theism. And the idea here is that, in fact, what we perceive as evil isn't in fact evil. So what is happening with human beings, this murder, isn't in fact evil. It's in fact good at a greater level. And the skeptical theist wants to say...
God works in mysterious ways. Do you think?
Yeah, in a sense. What they want to say is that God's ultimate plan is inscrutable. Inscrutable simply means that it's beyond human cognition to understand. So
Yeah.
God
We see
himself
the
couldn't even
pixel, God
present it
sees
to
the
you because it
picture.
would just blow your mind, right? And
Yeah.
so skeptical theist says, well, hang on a moment. I don't accept that this is ultimately evil. There is a greater good. When you ask them, what is this greater good? How can you establish it's a greater good? They will simply appeal to the inscrutable nature of God. That has many problems with it. We've been talking about it in class the last few days. People much smarter than me, and it leads to problems doubting God's intentions entirely. If you go that route, that's just one objection. There are many others. So skeptical theism might be another response they will attempt to give you to try and get out of this. It's normally given to the evidential problem of evil, but occasionally people might confuse it and offer it as a defense against the logical problem as well.
Of course, there may be
Okay.
theists. I mean, I'm particularly thinking of, say, deists who might not attribute perfect morality to a god. So
Yeah, but that's not the
supposedly-
problem. Those are not the problem, because they don't make any claims regarding our life here at the moment.
Oh yeah, no. I realise that. I'm just saying on a philosophical level, there'll be other kind of conceptions of God that
Right.
could survive the argument, but
Yeah, so there's two ways you can go with that, right? One way is to do what I do. I actually truly and honestly now define God as a maximally powerful, omniscient, knowing all true propositions, omnibenevolent, morally perfect, and perfectly rational. And what we mean by perfectly rational is that God's goals, his outcomes, are always met in the most ultimate or perfect way possible. Because otherwise, it could be the case that they could say, well, he's got a roundabout way of getting to X, Y, and Z. But a
those are
perfectly
your
rational being.
expectations.
Correct. Now, if somebody comes along, but there's reasons for it as well, Stoff. So I have thought about this quite a bit. And so I'll give you guys some reasons and you can push back, because the theist might push back. They might actually agree. Now, somebody like a Darth Dawkins will push back because he wants to widen the definition of God. I actually don't want to widen it. So in the case with where one of you guys was saying there that you're appealing to deism. Well, deism isn't God. You can call it something else, but my life, that's not God. Right? God requires these properties. Absent these properties, then you're not talking about God. You're talking about a demigod or a sub-God or some other entity.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's not God. And I'm an atheist towards God. And what is God? Right? The omni-properties. So taken that way, but now you might push back, and Stops might do so. You might say, well, hang on, Rob, why are you taking that view? So there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that's what the majority of people are committed to, whether they know it or not. If
Well,
you're
you must,
a
yeah,
Muslim or
exactly.
if you're a Christian, you're committed to an omni God. Because if you don't have that, well, then you introduce
no point.
skepticism.
Exactly.
And it becomes less than the greatest conceivable being. Another reason for this is it prevents people from labeling things God. Right? You've probably heard it yourself. People say the universe is God. Right? They might say that Zeus is a God. Well, no, it's not. Right? If we clearly and more narrowly define God, then none of those are God. Those are just other powerful entities or beings or whatever the case is. And it's similar with a deist, right? That is not a God. You could call it, a creator or something, but it's not going to have the great making properties. And the third thing I think is because what do most people understand to be God, right? A supreme being. And I heard it today multiple times. I was on Clubhouse. What is supreme? The greatest conceivable being. Anything less is going to be sub-supreme, not supreme, right? And so once you define it that way and you get agreement, then you can't wiggle out with what you said there, Drastic, that you're appealing to that. That's one way you could do it. So you can more narrowly define it like I have and give reasons why you think that that's the definition that people ought to hold. The other option is you can take a wider view like Stops or maybe other people might want to do. But then what you'd have to do, and Ozymandias is now on Clubhouse. You guys, Stops will remember him from years ago. He's a great guy and he's been on there quite a bit. His view is that all you need to do to defend atheism is have different arguments for different versions of God. Right now, I have got one because I'm using the logical problem against a more narrowly defined version of God, which I actually do think is what we ought to call God. Anything else just muddies the water. Or you could do something that goes, okay, I'm going to give an argument against the omni God. I'm going to give an argument against the deist God. I'm going to give an argument against whatever other God you want to do. But now you're committed to giving different arguments for different conceptions of God. So you'd have to have all these arguments lined up and ready to go, and you'd have to give them one after another. And that way you could knock down every single conception of God. I think that's just hard work to do it that way. You could if you want to be like far more charitable on the word God, but I think then you're going to be ending up with people calling the universe God. And how are you going to defend against that? What are you going to say as an argument against the universe being God? Right? Because we think the universe exists as well. We just don't call it God, and I don't think we should. So it prevents people from making that maneuver. But then also by my lights, a deist is actually an atheist. So some people won't be happy with that. Right? That is one of the problems with taking
Yeah,
my
I wanted
view.
to ask you
is
about that
that
actually,
is.
Rob. I mean, could you sort of elaborate your justification for that? Because it's not something that I really heard before, that deism. I mean, I can understand from the point of view that there doesn't essentially seem to be any difference between a world with a deist god and a world with no gods, because there's no interaction and there's nothing that's demanded of anyone. So I can see from the point of view of saying there's no practical difference, I would agree. But are you arguing from that point of view, or are you saying a kind of deeper
No, I'm
philosophy?
simply defining God as the supreme being, the greatest conceivable being, and there's certain minimum characteristics of a greatest conceivable being. A, that it's supposed to exist, obviously. B, that it's maximally powerful, all-knowing, omnibenevolent. We could actually list out a lot more great making properties. I think a lot of them are going to be controversial. I don't think those ones are. And once you accept that God is the greatest conceivable being, well, then it rules out deism, because that God, by definition, couldn't be the greatest conceivable being, because
Why
you
not?
don't have access to those. Well, you don't have access to those great making properties. Now, if
Which
it were
one
the
does
case
it?
that God, but the other thing that I think is a great making property as well, and that this is actually debatable, but I think most theists would agree, is that it's a personal creator. Right, an impersonal creator, I think, is not as great as a personal creator, because a personal creator can communicate with its creation, and therefore give them this information about itself such that they would know that it's a supreme being. Because you could have a
That's your
deist God
perception.
that's powerful
Yeah, but
enough to create the universe and then cease to exist, or you could in fact have a supreme being in some way, but you've got no access to it. So what is the greatest conceivable being? One of those is to communicate personally such that you would know that it's the greatest conceivable being. Otherwise, it's hidden in mystery. And what's greater, a being that's hidden in mystery, or a being that reveals itself as the greatest conceivable being?
but if
Robert, this has a sorry,
deist could
this is
argue, sorry, stop. So just say a deist could argue that if the god has no interest in having personal contact with them, then they would still have all these properties. It just chooses not to use them.
to act on them.
Yeah, but you couldn't establish that, right? You couldn't establish that. And that's where we get
No.
into a discussion on the great making properties.
Exactly.
because
What
one of the
This
great
is why
making
this is
properties.
flawed.
Mhm.
Because on the atheism TV show in German, we have a moderator who is a pantheist, and this is exactly his argument. He says it is the greatest conceivable being, yet it doesn't act on that. It doesn't need to, because it is so great that it doesn't need any kind of personal gratification coming back from the humans, because exactly it is over and above this. And I think this is the case that Drastic is trying to make.
That's that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so you're saying that the greatest conceivable being is. Well, let me just check in with you, or with the guy that you maybe know his view better than I do. Stop. Is he going to agree that minimal great making properties is a maximally powerful, all-knowing, omnibenevolent, personal? Okay, he's not going to say personal. So is he going to accept the
Not
three
personal.
omnis?
Exactly. Everything else, yes, not personal.
Okay, so then the question is, how would he know that it's omnibenevolent, or that it knows
Well,
all propositions,
this is-
or that it's maximally powerful? You can assert it.
Now, you can't ask a logical question about this. You can't. It's just one of the
Yeah, but then
assumptions.
it's a baseless assertion, right? And
It
then the
is.
question
Of course
to
it
me,
is, Rob. Yes.
but
of
then the
course
question
it
to me,
is.
to that person who claims that he's a pantheist, is: do you accept that revealing yourself is greater than keeping yourself hidden? If he's
And
going
he
to
will
say
not
no,
have
well,
an
then we can
answer.
discuss that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah.
See,
Yeah, so that's why.
I wouldn't say that it necessarily makes you better or worse. I think you could argue that it could be neutral. I mean, why? But
No,
the God didn't.
no.
Well, if the God didn't feel it was needed to reveal itself, if it doesn't think it's important, say, for you to live your life knowing that God exists, then it wouldn't reveal itself.
Yeah, but isn't so now you're asking if God, if his nature is to want to be in contact with the humans, and you're
Yeah,
saying
just like in his nature
no.
to be isolationist from humanity.
Well, to be
Just-
revered,
but I
it doesn't require reverence.
Mm.
Okay, but I think if you accept those three properties, then as far as I can tell me if I'm missing something, then the logical problem of evil still runs against that being, right? If it's the case that creation is a free gift and you have the omni properties, then and there is evil in the world, then the logical problem will still entail that God doesn't exist, whether it's a quote personal God or not. If you want to just assert that it's the same sort of God as a personal God, because they at least have a justification that God has given them access to this information. Whether they can prove it, that's different, right? But at least in the theology, if you're going to do an internal critique, in Christianity or Islam, you can derive great making properties from the text, and the text is what? God's personal creation. But if, let's say, you had that same being, but there was no interaction with the beings, but they want to claim that he has those same properties, well, then it seems to me that the problem of evil would still run and be successful against that God as well. So now you would have to appeal to a God that doesn't have the omni properties. But then, to my mind, then God doesn't exist. So now you're appealing to something not God, which just means that you conceded the argument that God doesn't exist. That's why it's so important up front to get the three omnis, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if you're talking about being perfectly moral, then yes, you still got it would still fall foul of the same argument. But I would say that I could see potentially someone arguing from the point of view of saying, okay, maybe God isn't morally perfect. They are maximally moral in the same way that they'll say they're maximally just or maximally loving, and maybe have some kind of conception of it. I mean, it might be a very fringe way of arguing, but
I think the problem, I think there's a symmetry breaker there, which is that with maximal power, there's a logical entailment to that. Now, with maximal benevolence, I don't see the logical entailment. And I guess what I mean by that is what most theists that are at least understand the topic, they're not going to claim that God can do things that are illogical. I mean, I've come across one or two, but even when you try and explain it, it's like you can see that you're not going to be able to penetrate, and you just have to let those people go. But most slightly more sophisticated people that understand it, they're going to accept it, and I'm going to accept it as well because I'm doing an internal critique that omnipotence is God can do anything that is logically possible. So God is bound by logic. He cannot make a squared circle or a married bachelor or exist or not exist at the same time. Because if they accept logical contradictions, well, that just means that their worldview is potentially absurd. Because then they've been given the message and not given the message. Now they are accepting logical contradictions. So most theists won't want to accept logical contradictions. But with the omnibenevolence, I don't see that there's a logical contradiction there. So to say maximally good, to my mind, is analytically, that is to say, it is exactly equivalent to saying morally perfect. I don't see a distinction there. And if you're going to say, well, it's less than perfect, but it's still maximal, now you'd have to explain why it is that essentially you're saying that God is imperfect, or that he can be less than perfect but still be maximal. That would be, to my mind,
well,
you're saying
it's as close to moral perfection as it's possible to be. I suppose that would be a way of saying it.
Yeah, okay, but what does that actually mean? What does that mean in reality? Does that mean that God can in fact do something that's morally imperfect, or what's the logical bar? Because remember, this entails God's nature. So I guess the question is, what is it that prevents you from saying that he's logically perfect?
Well,
I suppose.
Well, just off the top of my head, I can imagine an argument that would say something like, I suppose it would bend back to something like their concept of libertarian free will. So they would say the result of having free will is that you're going to have some outcomes that are going to be less than morally perfect. So therefore, in order to allow that to happen, allow human beings to exist, there has to be this step down from moral perfection. And maybe God deems that that's a trade-off worth having.
Yeah, but then the question is, was creation necessary, or was it an act of free will on God's part?
It would depend how they're defining God, I suppose.
Yeah, I hate to be that guy, but I'm going to come in here.
No
we're at the 2 hour mark. Do you guys want to keep going? Great. Yeah. Do you guys want to go a bit more?
I'm up to you guys. I just thought I'd present it to you. We could talk more about it, and you can offer rebuttals. I just don't think that any of these sort of rebuttals work. And like you say, you might have to redefine God to get out of this. That's what some theists try to do. You might have to redefine evil. I think these are all slippery maneuvers that don't actually address the argument. So I've, like I say, I've presented this to theists who, think that they know their stuff, and I've just not heard a substantial rebuttal. Because if creation is a free gift and God is morally perfect, that means the creation wasn't necessary. So free will or any of those sort of arguments doesn't seem like it's necessary. And the trans world depravity planting his argument doesn't seem to work to me either. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's like a nuance that I haven't seen or heard of. That's entirely possible. But currently, I don't think there's a defeater, at least to my mind, to this argument.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I'm kind of trying to play devil's advocate a little bit here with the
No, that's
deism.
fine. No, that's fine.
But no, I mean, I remember when you first sent that to me, I thought it was a really solid piece of logical thinking. I agree. I don't really think you can get out of it, and certainly not for any traditional monotheistic, Christian, Muslim, Jewish.
But I think what will happen, no, I appreciate that. And I think if you want me to like stops, I mean, okay, it won't help in German unless they're prepared to hear an English speaker, or, if you've got it on the Discord server, just invite me. I think you'd have to ping me on Clubhouse though, Drastic, because I don't really go on Discord much anymore. But I'll present this to anybody, because I'm aware of those sort of responses that you've uttered there, and I'm quite aware now of, I won't say everything, but most of the responses that most people will try and bring as a attempted rebuttal here. And I think there's strong answers against any of those attempted rebuttals. So it's one thing to have the argument, but it's the other thing to kind of know what the rebuttals are going to be and how you can respond to those. And like I said, I'm not perfect at it. And if I do get stuck at some point, which I haven't yet, but then I'll just go back to, the person that wrote this that I think is, 10 times smarter than me. And if he came on here, I mean, I tell you what, we would have like a very powerful philosophical person, but also understands Islam. I think he's like really good at this. And I don't say that lightly. He won't know as much as Stops about maybe every single response to every single Muslim critique, but he will know the philosophical. He does know the differences within Islam and quite a bit of the jurisprudence. And like I say, he's got a master's degree in philosophy, and he put together this argument, and I've heard him. And it's one thing, right? You hear philosophers, right? Maybe I should send you guys a video of him doing it with somebody. But when you listen to the person, right, he's like really sharp when he's in the mood. Sometimes he screws about this stuff. Sometimes like people that are really good at stuff just take it for granted and they piss about. But when he's not pissing about, he's very, very strong. To my mind, one of the top debaters that I've heard that is not a professional philosopher. And I think he could go up against professional philosophers to some degree, but certainly anybody that isn't a professional philosopher, no matter how good they are, I would rate him very, very highly.
Yeah,
and this,
Rob,
this, this is Venus you're talking about, Rob. This is Venus.
Venus, yeah, from Discord. He's got a different name on Clubhouse. But like I say, he's a bit scatterish in the sense that he'll fart around, he'll be a bit of a troll occasionally, and he'll say some unpleasant stuff on occasions. But then on occasions when he's in the mood,
my kind of guy.
Yeah. But when he's in the mood and he's like, if I can find the video, I'll send you a masterclass how he defended this against a Christian. And you listen to the rebuttals and how smart he is, how quickly he knew what was coming, how quickly he can respond to it. And to me, it was a masterclass in an informal debate.
Yeah, if you can send me his contact as well, if you can get him on the show, I would really like it.
He's a bit, he'll do it on Clubhouse. He's a bit, I wouldn't say skitterish, but he's a bit scattergun. I'm not sure you could do something. He doesn't do things formally. He'll come on when he wants to. He's not the sort of guy that you can pin down and hold to a particular time. I've asked him to debate people, and he's like, I don't do formal debates. I'll do things if they happen in the room at the time when I'm here and I'm in the mood. So it's that sort of guy. So it's very unlikely. I'll try and pass you on somehow, but I doubt you'll get him on here in an official capacity at 9 p.m. ready to do X, Y, and Z. That's probably not going to easily happen, I guess.
For sure.
He's not well trained.
Yeah, it's not about order and structure for him.
Yeah, it's 2 hours, and I want to thank Rob for doing that, because this is very useful, I think.
Yes.
And Nick, thank you for that video and shining the spotlight on Iran. That was really nice of you.
Yeah,
I think it's brilliant. For the 11th anniversary, we've disproved God essentially. So
yeah, we did once again.
That's a nice way to celebrate the 11 years of the show.
Yeah.
Okay, now you can bring out the candles.
Yeah.
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 In fact, I want to go too. So no, I say two.
Pio,
It's
just
my time
give
to
me
sleep.
2 seconds. What's a vriki punlaist?
Oh, don't ask me about that. It's a religion I invented.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you. Bye.
Have a nice weekend. It was really great and was really it got
Great to
tears in
catch
my
up with you
eyes.
guys. Thank you so much for the
Rob.
invite. Let's make it a yearly thing. If we're all still around, that'll tell us whether we're all still alive and well. So once a year, if you could do this,
Yeah.
if you send it to Stops, he'll ping me because we're still in contact with each other, and we could do this once a year. That'll be great. If you got,
For
like I
sure.
say, if you've got somebody else that thinks that they, and you say that I've got the logical problem of evil, I can run against them, and they think that they've got a defeater, I'll come on the show and we could do an informal debate. I'll run the argument. They can try and defend it, or they can try and critique it, and I'll defend it. And this is the other thing, right? That I'm doing a lot more now. I'm going out there and saying, I went into a Muslim room and I said, "Do you guys still believe Islam is true? I mean, atheism is true and Islam is false." And this sort of shocked them a little bit, because normally you go in there and say, "Why is Islam true?" And they're so used to defending. But here I came in and I said, "I've got an argument that defeats your position," and it was like a bit of a shock. So I'm doing a lot more of that now, because I'm going, hang on a moment. We're always asking them, we don't think they've got a good argument, but hey, I'm going to present this argument and see if they can respond to it, because they are so used to, trying to defend their view, that I don't think they're very good at critiquing somebody else's, even, our moral system or whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, they're very bad at critiquing atheism.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So there you go. So we learned something on the 11th. Is it really 11th?
Anniversary
11th
Gin and
anniversary
Tonic show.
Yeah, but I can't believe it's so long.
It's true. I've checked the records thoroughly. It's definitely
Unbelievable.
Stops, were you
It's a
on from
pity
the very
Rationalizer
beginning?
didn't make it.
Yeah. Have you been on
Yeah.
since the very beginning, Stops?
I think I missed the first two.
Okay. We'll let you off that. So you really
You can look it up on Drastic Measures channel, right? Because
I don't know, Rob, if you're aware of this. Drastic has taken it upon himself to sort of summarize everything that we've done over the last 11 years. So he's bringing out all the shows again, and he's digging out all the old stuff and bringing it up and posting it.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's awesome, because it sort of, it brings it back again. You can, stuff that we didn't know, or that you've done multiple time Stops, and you maybe changed, or there's something.
But he hasn't reached
you go
yet
back to,
from a chronology the Rob era yet.
No, obviously not. That's going to take years, right?
Well, yeah. What I've done is I've done the kind of classic era of the first kind of 18 months of the show, and I'm onto the part with Clinshaw and Stops era. But I'm chaptering everything, because I think some of the problem is that you've got hundreds of hours of really good content, but I think it could be quite intimidating to come up to a J&T episode and not know what's going to be talked about. So I'm chaptering by topic to make it kind of easy reference, so people can just dip in and, there's something you want to talk about, child marriage or about polygamy or, whatever aspect of Islam, you've got it all kind of recorded there for the episode. So it's easy to kind of reference. And I put up a lot of the guest episodes that you've done, so with people like Ozzy and
yes, I've seen that. I saw that pop up in the feed at one point.
I mean, I've put up all those, and there's been some fantastic responses. I mean, there's it's thousands and thousands of views on some of them, so I think people have appreciated.
Awesome.
So I have done some from your era, but I've only done the special guest episodes. So, I don't know how. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, let me see if I can put up your channel here as a link.
I mean, you can, probably best way, if you want to search it, just put Drastic Measures Gin and Tonic, and that will bring it up. Unfortunately, if you just do Drastic Measures, I seem to be, I don't know, shadow banned or something on YouTube. But if you put Gin and Tonic in the search as well, then you can find my stuff. But
anyway, we hope that you will get Allah's reward for this adequately.
I know.
That's your standard test, right?
Oh, Allah's going to have to put me in every kind of hell that exists, I think, for reproducing this content. So.
Maybe you'll get into the short queue, the VIP waiting queue for heaven.
Yeah.
Rob,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I think I beat drastic measures to it, but Rob, I have to apologize. I turned your beloved show into a Muslim show.
No, it's all good, my friend.
I went just to troll Redbeard. I went on his channel and took the Shahada, just so I don't have to burn in eternal hellfire.
Yeah, do it as Allah
dear.
did. He took the Shahada too. So
I'd like to have those guys come onto Clubhouse because they've got obviously their little live stream where they've got their little safe space and they can go 5-on-1 or whatever the case is. But bring these guys onto Clubhouse and I'll tell you what, I mean, you know, I know a little bit, but there's people on there, both Christian and atheist, that really are they'll take him to the cleaners. He wouldn't even know what the hell was going on.
That's why he'll never go, though, isn't it? I mean, he hasn't got the courage to be in a kind of a fair, open system where you can't just mute everybody.
No.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Then say.
All right.
I
love to be here. Thank you very much for your.
Yeah, this was good fun. See you for year 12, maybe then next year.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you. To
Nick,
everybody.
thank you very
Thanks
much for
again. Great
taking
seeing
over.
you all.
Say hi to Mustafa from me.
For sure. Just before we go, I got some amazing announcements for the next couple of episodes for the audience. Next week, we're getting a special guest. He's one of the lead journalists from the channel Slate. He interviewed people like Sarah Hyder and such, the ex-Muslims of North America president. And then his channel has around 250K subscribers. He's going to be coming on our channel next week. We're going to have a great discussion. Moose has some questions prepared for him, and then I also have questions prepared. And then we're also in talks with Dr. Shabir Ali for our 500th episode to do a stream with him. So these are some upcoming news if you guys want to watch that. And then every year I'll be reaching out to you guys to do a 1-year anniversary. I wanted to do it last year for the 10-year, but we got the show in November.
Who cares about a 10 year? 11 years is much important.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, let's meet up in Discord, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. It's been fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Good
Take care.
night. Thank you. See you next year.
See ya. Take care. All right, let's end this here.